Summer is officially here, baby, and we could think of no better way to stay cool this summer than by giving back to others. On September 1st, Laura and I will be donating $1 for every rating and $2 for every written review on Apple Podcasts to a charity that you, our listeners, get to help us pick. Follow us on our socials at Impolite Society Podcast to find out more about how we're going to be picking our charity and to weigh in and let us know what charity you want us to support. But that's not it, because not only are you helping us help others, you also have a chance to help yourself. Not only are we going to be cutting a check to a charity on September 1st, we are also going to be choosing a written review at random to win a $50 gift card and some Impolite Society swag. So if you leave us a review, let us know by taking a screenshot and emailing it to us at rude@impolitesocietypodcast.com or slip it into the DMs of any of our socials. Fixing this messed up world is hard, but when you take a couple seconds to leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts, you can rest assured that you did something positive with your summer and you helped us improve the world $1 at a time. Thank you so much for listening. Now to the show.
You're listening to Impolite Society with Laura and Rachel.
Save your tears for another day. Do do do. You know that song?
Not in the slightest.
Oh my god. Do you not listen to any modern music?
Not very many. Not very much.
Oh my gosh. Every day I tell myself, don't be that person who says music peaked when I was a teenager. And then I force myself.
Say that. I
force myself to listen to music. Anyways, well, it's a great song. It's by The Weeknd. Look it up, especially the remix that he does with Ariana Grande, my girl. If you listen to the show, you know that I stan Ariana Grande. Ugh,
I know nothing. Perfect. I know nothing about her other than like high ponytail. Like that's all I got.
Beautiful hair, beautiful face, beautiful voice, and just that kind of skinny that every young girl in the early 2000s wanted to be.
Just like freakish.
Just like so thin. Oh my god, just so thin.
Like you look at her and you're like, eat a sandwich, all right?
Yeah, I don't know if I say that. I'm just say like, damn, how do my arms get that thin? But that's besides the point, because what she is more than thin is fucking talented as shit. Every time I watch her performance of God is a Woman live at the, I think it's like the VMAs or some shit like that, I literally cry. Like I tear up and I cry because it's so good. And I bet you thought I lost it for a second when I just went off the rails on my Ariana Grande train. But no, I brought it back to crying because guess what? That is what we're talking about today. We're talking about crying.
That's my fake crying. That kind of sounded like a ghost.
I was going to say, is that the ghost of podcast past? Coming to show me my wrongs? The wrongs I've done?
Philip Marley. No, it's Jacob Marley, not Philip Marley. I don't know what that is.
I only know Marley and Marley. Ooh. From the Muppet Christmas special?
Oh, yeah.
Or Muppet Carol.
We watch
Christmas
that
Carol?
every year, yeah.
Every goddamn year. But like Scrooge at the end, when he was so happy and moved, he cried, right? And crying is something that we all do at one point or another, whether it's when we are super sad or listening to Ari sing live or watching a sad dog video on Facebook. We've all cried one time or another.
What?
So we're talking
Not me. I've never cried.
That's like a whole nother kind of messed up, but that's a different episode.
It's a lie. I've definitely cried.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen you cry at some point.
What?
I don't know.
Shut up. Shut your whore mouth, Rachel.
What? What? I definitely have, I think, at least once.
You definitely have, but we'll get to my opinions on crying later.
Okay. So what are we talking about with crying specifically? Well, this was actually brought to my attention by my darling husband,
Dan. Hi, Dan.
Yeah, he might listen. He occasionally listens. But anyways, we were having a fight. I can't really remember what it was, but we were some kind of discussion. I got so exasperated that I started crying at some point. And then he comes and he sits next to me and like consoles me. And I was like, oh, thank you for being so nice. Because I was like, that wasn't always the case. He's not good with his feelings or his emotions. But anyways, and this exactly sums up why he wasn't always the best about it in the past. And he's like, yeah, I've like really come to realize like crying, it's because your emotions, where in the past I felt that when you cried in front of me, it was a way to try to manipulate me, or it was a manipulation tactic. And that got me thinking. I was like, I've never thought that, like I've never intended that in my life, but it really got me thinking about it, because when do you cry? Like at the climax of a fight, and then boom, everything's kind of diffused, everything's kind of de-escalated.
I feel like a lot of men feel this way, that it is emotional manipulation, and that they feel like they have to then like stop their train and console a woman. So they feel like people are doing it on purpose, or women specifically are doing it on purpose to derail them.
Yeah, or when you're in a fight and they feel like they're losing, men might think that a woman pulls out the big tears so that she can get her way.
It's like the race card, but it's the crying card.
Yeah, exactly. Because there is a whole lot to unpack when it comes to crying. To hear your spouse say that, and that he harbors those feelings, it really makes you look at all your interactions, all your stupid fights you had when you were kids, like the whole thing. It makes you look at it differently. So that's what I wanted to dig into today. So my rude question was I, as a woman, using crying to manipulate the men in my life?
Ooh, that's a tough question.
Yes, and to get to the bottom of this, we are going to learn exactly how crying works and why humans are the only animals to cry. But we'll do all of that right after this break. Oh wait, we're back. We have to get it together. We've just been crying so much because we know you're crying, and we're crying and we know you're crying, and we just think it's so moving. I don't know what, that was weird. Anyways, people crying, we're here talking about it. I'm going to be candid. There's not a lot of concrete research on it. It's still just a lot of speculation as to what goes on.
This was another thing that's like another grand mystery when it comes to the human body. The menstruation, about how we don't know exactly why humans menstruate and other mammals and other animals don't. This is another thing where like we don't know why we do it. It's just a bunch of theories about why.
Yes, and we're going to dig into all those theories. But the things we do know concretely is people have been fascinated by crying for centuries. Going as far back as the birth of humanity, people have been intrigued by it. And we still are kind of grasping at straws as to why we do it. And back in the day, we had some very interesting theories, as early as 1500. I believe that's 1500 BCE, before Common Era.
Oh, wow.
Crying. No, I don't know what that is.
That can't be. I think the theories about why people have been crying is as early as 1500s, but not crying.
Oh, yeah, no, crying's been happening for forever. But the theories date back as early as the 1500s, where people thought crying was the byproduct of the heart material weakening and turning into water, then being expressed through our eyes, I guess.
That sounds completely legit. I don't know about you, but whenever I cry, I feel the vapors coming on.
Yeah, it's just little bits of your heart just deteriorating. Another theory, and this one comes from the 1800s. I got the date wrong in the notes. But they believe that it was because the head or the heart was getting so hot that it was condensating, and then that was being let out through our eyes.
That sounds a little bit more plausible, because I feel like emotion definitely does come with heat. You know what I mean? Like there's a physical reaction to high emotion and you feel like anger or, you feel hot, you feel under pressure, you know what I mean? Like even when you're not angry, but when you're sad, like you can feel that pressure behind your eyes. So I feel like I'm going to give them a little bit of credit there in the 1800s. They didn't know how the body worked, but they were trying to take what they had and work with it.
Yes, these people had no factual or no scientific understanding of the world, so they were going 100% on their gut, which what makes sense for what they landed on, right? But they were all very accurate in the sense that crying was linked to emotions, and that is kind of the big takeaway that we have today. We cry when we're sad or we're frustrated or happy.
Or angry.
Yeah, there's something going on where our emotions are tied to our tear ducts.
Absolutely.
But what are these tear ducts anyway? Where do tears come from? So tears are salty fluid made of protein, water, mucus, and oil, which is
mucus.
Real sexy stuff. Released from the lacrimal.
I saw your pronunciation on here and I was like, I know she's going to mess that up.
Lacrimal, from the lacrimal gland, the glands in your upper and other regions of your eye. When enough of this fluid begins to build up, they spill over your eyelids and they don't fall, but they crash around me. And that is a good bullet for my Valentine reference. Do you know that band?
I was going to say this got to be. I know bullet from it. I know.
Your tears don't fall, they crash around me. Very like screamo band.
I'm not super familiar with the band. I feel like listening to you sing these songs, I feel like if I listened to them, I maybe would know them.
What, you think that I'm too far off to even recognize?
No, I mean, the crescendos and the music. I don't know. But I've definitely been here, Tears building up around you. You don't want to let them go. I never want to let them go. I'm always trying to keep that shit under wraps.
Lock it down. Well, I mean, you're doing a good job because you're crying right now, and I would never be able to tell. Laura's
I always
crying.
cry when we make Impolite Society. It's just so beautiful.
Well, that too. But you're crying, I'm crying, and listener, you're crying too. Because we are producing a type of tear called basal tears 24/7. They are the exact kind of tears that just keep your eyes lubricated, and without them, it turns into some like Raiders of the Lost Ark type shit where everybody turns to dust and catches on fire. We don't want that. But not only are they keeping our eyes lubricated, they're making a lot of tears. And on average day, we make between 5 and 10 ounces of tears, which is, for reference, either a shot glass or a healthy pour of wine worth of tears in our eyes.
That is
every
a lot.
day.
That is a lot. I mean, you think about dry eyes, clear eyes, you have a problem with not having enough tears. You're very irritated in the eyeball region.
Not fun. But another kind of tear is reflex tears, which these are our pals that help us out when irritants get up in our eyeballs, like a small bug or maybe some fumes from an onion. They are the ones that help flush our eyes out and keep it clean and healthy.
Or when you get a bop in the nose from a baby's head unexpectedly and your eyeballs tear up.
Yep. When that happens, those sensory nerves in your cornea send out a hormone to that gland that we talked about, the lacrimal.
There you
go. And it flushes that invader right out of there.
Get that bee out of my eyeball.
But those are the two kind of like basic biological tears. There's a third kind of tears that we're going to be talking about for the rest of the episode today. And those are emotional tears.
So the other two kinds, those incur in basically like any animal with an eyeball.
Yes. Anybody with the ball in their eye, they have these kind of tears. Great. We are the only animal that has the emotional tears. So these bad boys start in the cerebellum. What? I must have typed that wrong.
Oh, cerebrum. It's got to be cerebellum because it's got to be the cerebrum. Then cerebellum is something different. I'm sorry. I fucked you up.
Okay. So these bad boys start in the cerebrum, in the brain, where our sadness and other emotions are registered. And then in the hormones go, and then they flood the ocular area. And this is what turns on the waterworks when we are watching those Sarah McLachlan sad dogs in kennels videos.
Did you mean the endocrine system?
The endocrine syndrome. It's
the indoctrination system, which is the system that has been kicked in by our corporate overlords.
Yeah, we've been all endocrine systemed every day.
Endocrine systems. Endocrine system.
Endocrine. So those are the three kinds of tears that we have. And the third is uniquely human and also differentiated from the first two, not only because it's like a physiological response versus emotional response, but those tears themselves are different, right? So scientists have found that emotional tears are chemically different than our kind of physical response tears. These tears contain much more protein and other hormones than the run-of-the-mill tears.
Okay.
So while we don't know why humans cry, we don't know why these emotional tears are different. One of the kind of leading ideas behind why they are different is because these proteins make the tears thicker, right? So they stick on our eyeballs and they form bigger drops and they roll down our faces slower. So it makes it a little bit more performative or noticeable. And that's what it comes down to is crying, this emotional crying. There's a lot of theories around it being a kind of a physical release and detoxing our bodies and all this stuff. But with this theory of how the tears perform differently and, you know, especially we're coming to our rude topic today, it just kind of enforces the social power of crying.
I think that what that means to me is it's uniquely human because humans are uniquely social. It's at least not in its design is it, quote, manipulative. It's a mechanism that allows us to be more social and more socially connected.
Yeah. Because crying is a nonverbal way for us to communicate, right? Because when we see someone crying, it's powerful. It's a nonverbal way that's aimed at soliciting assistance and comfort and social support from those around us. Because it's a very...
But not necessarily consciously, though. The solicitation is not necessarily conscious. It's just part of humans.
That's more about the response that we give when we see crying, because it is a very reliable sign that that person who is crying is in distress. Because crying causes a strong social reaction, it can be very effectively used as a way of putting a big kibosh on whatever's happening, right? Everybody responds differently as soon as tears well up. And I know I'm one of them. I'm very awkward around crying people. I don't know what the heck to do. And I'm a big crier. I cry all the time.
It's always hard when somebody starts crying. You're like, get.
Well, yeah, because it literally puts a big stop on everything, just shuts it all down. And we are also, as unique as crying is and as unique as its response is, we're also uniquely positioned to see and recognize these tears too. Because a study by Vassar College showed participants stills from famous movies where the actors had been crying, and it gave them the picture of the original with the tears in their eyes, and then a photoshopped one where they took the tears out, and they got the participants' reaction to those photos, both of them. And so the presence of tears actually significantly increased the perceived level of emotionality when the participants were looking at the pictures.
Well, that makes 100% sense. I know that's a funny sentence. It makes 100% sense. When you see it, I mean, you've just ramped up the emotionality of the shine. Changes the whole dynamic.
Yes, yeah. And for them to be picking up on it, and, you know, that's where you get kind of the stigma around people who fake cry. And, you know, people are like, oh, they're acting like they're crying, but I don't see any tears. It really adds to that kind of level of honesty or authenticity when somebody is, a raw emotion when somebody is crying.
Yeah, absolutely.
But where does crying come from? We talked a lot about how it's different, how we're the only ones to do it, why we're so responsive to it, but we don't really know where exactly it comes from. We do know it starts with the number one crying population in the world.
Charlotte.
And what is Charlotte?
She's a baby.
She's a baby, which actually she's aged out of this first group.
She is. She's a toddler now.
Yes, yeah. So when we think of crying, we think of babies, little fresh out the womb babies who are just like nonstop,
God.
loud.
The fucking worst.
I can't. It does not sound pleasant. But we all did it. When we were born, we came out, most of us at least, came out screaming, crying. It's part of nature, right? Mm-hmm. And this is a part of nature we cannot control. This is a reflex. So when you're a little bitty infant, your crying is out of your control. It's literally just how you use to communicate to your parents that you are in need of something.
It's the only thing that they know how to say.
Well, yeah, and it's actually very fascinating. So nobody really knows why we started crying from an evolutionary standpoint, right? But there is a lot of theories. And from reading these theories, my personal one that I've kind of identified as my own is that it's not so much saying like, it's not crying because they're calling a parent's attention to them, the baby. It's more of crying to prevent the baby from being set down, right? Because a good baby, quote unquote, a good baby that doesn't make any noise, it doesn't fuss, you put it down.
Ignored.
Yeah, you walk away, you do whatever. Yeah. But a baby who screams his head off when his mom sets him down, that's going to be a baby that's well taken care of.
Yeah, it's a baby that's constantly strapped to you. When Charlotte was very, very small, like just out of the womb, and would fall asleep consistently while being fed, the lactation consultant in the hospital said, this is what we do. You take their clothes off of them and you lay them on the ground. They will, or not on the ground, but like, you just like lay them in your lap and like not have your arms continually around them. That will wake them up. Like make her think that she's been abandoned. She will wake up to eat. like if I lay her on my lap and don't put my arms around her, she might be falling asleep and then she'll be like,
Well, yeah. No, and that's actually something else I learned in here that was like the most heartbreaking fact of all is that, you hear about sleep training and people who like let their babies cry it out. But that just because your baby isn't stopping crying because it's learning to soothe itself. Your baby has stopped crying because it's learned that you're not coming for it. And that's just like the saddest thing I've ever heard.
I mean, it depends on what age you're talking about. Like sleep training, don't even try that shit under 3 months old. Don't even fucking touch it because your baby doesn't know any goddamn difference. But at a certain point, yeah, they will learn to soothe themselves. But if it's before a certain amount, yeah, I agree.
And that age, right? That kind of magic number for when babies they start to come aware of the effect they have on the world and cause and effect. That happens around 10 months. And that's where our relationship with crying changes. So it goes.
I feel like it's sooner than this, but okay, go ahead.
Well, this came from a How Stuff Worked article, so we'll like maybe debate on its legitimacy a little bit.
Because Charlotte, before 10 months, there was definitely a time where she was, and then she sees me looking at her and she's like, like big smile.
Oh gosh, that manipulative little girl.
And I know the difference because I look at her and I'll be like, oh, you're really crying. Like I can see like the big tears in her eyes. And I'm like, oh.
See?
And then I come to her and I know that it's serious. But when she's just like, I'm like, I know what you're doing. You're whining.
So they pick up on that around 10 months-ish, give or change. Mm-hmm. And that's when they're starting to understand social dynamics, understanding how they can control the world. And that's where crying just becomes attention-seeking as opposed to being like, feed me, love me, pick me up, that kind of thing. Keep me close.
Yeah.
So then as we continue to age, it stays a mechanism for getting attention. And that stays the same for both boys and girls. They cry the same amount up until puberty, that is. So while we don't know the exact reason why everything changes once those hormones kick in,
Once those hormones kick in, we got boners left and right.
Flopping around everywhere. But they speculate why this happens, whether it's, the hormones themselves that make the difference, or societal pressures come into factor, or
Probably
some
a
really
combination of both.
Yeah, or some really interesting theory about women's tear ducts being smaller so they overflow faster, and that makes women cry easier than men.
That sounds kind of like bullshit to me.
It sounds a little bit like those 1950s science that's like, women's brains are smaller, so they should stay in the kitchen.
Yeah, I don't necessarily buy that. I think it's probably a combination of hormones and societal.
For sure. But at the end of the day, it cannot be denied that women do cry 3 to 5 times more than men.
Ugh, we're disgusting. We're the fucking worst. I hate crying. Ugh. Blech.
Oh, I love crying, but I like doing it by myself mostly. I don't really cry in front of people. I love a good cry. It's like on the way to work, just sobbing about life. If you hear me, put your hands up. What? Where's all my car criers? Hey, ho.
I have definitely done some car crying in my life, and I don't like it. I fucking hate it.
Oh, see, I like it. I mean, it's like a Japanese word for like the beauty and like broken things. I'm like, yeah. Being sad is nice sometimes.
Sometimes.
Anyways. But the fact that women cry, that's really at the crux of this whole question today, because that's what my husband was saying when he said crying is manipulating. And that's what we talked about at the top, that women use crying, there's a belief, or maybe that a lot of men or a lot of people, or it's a cultural trope that women use crying to get their way, to get out of situations that they don't like, or, to get out of arguments they feel like they're losing. And I get it. This is very heteronormative of us to kind of take this approach. But I think regardless of our walk of life or the way we live our life, we're familiar with this concept, whether it's from sitcoms or, buddy flicks or even TikToks that I've been watching recently. It comes up again and again, which kind of compounded into me asking this question today. So now that we've kind of understood a little bit more of how crying works and the social dynamics of it, we're going to come back and we're going to dig into this musing section of Is Crying Manipulative? Right when we come back.
Let me just say off the bat, I fucking hate crying. I hate it. Like when I'm by myself, like it's fine. It's not that bad by myself. When I am in an emotionally charged situation and I'm crying, I hate that it happens. Can't freaking stand it. Like even when I do get that emotional like sympathy from my husband in an argument, I don't like it. Like it's not a choice that I made, and I hate that kind of derails him. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to diffuse the situation. I don't want to throw you off of whatever you're doing. Like, I want to hash this out as it is. And I hate that, number one, I hate that I'm showing my emotions in such a blatant way. And I hate that it also then changes the dynamic of the conversation. Like, that's not what I intend. I always want to approach things like, this is what it is. Let's address it as is. And then I get overwhelmed and I start crying, and then it becomes about me. And I don't want it to be about me. I want us to have this hash out. You know what I mean? I fucking hate crying.
Because I will say that, I don't want to cry in front of people. Maybe I've just been really conditioned to it because I've been crying in front of people my whole life. Listen to the death episode, really dig into the archives. I cried like once a year, every elementary school year, because we talk about death at some point. So it is what it is. But no, it's really embarrassing in the moment. But like,
it is
crying in front of my husband, I've found, and I'll save this for kind of like the big question at the end, because this has caused me to do a lot of introspecting. Yeah, about how crying has appeared in my relationship. But I will say, like, I don't hate it. I mean, like, I don't like crying in front of my husband. But I mean, if our fight has gotten to the point where somebody's crying, we're not being healthy. It's not a healthy discussion. Like, crying you don't get to that level, you know, when you're having like a civil debate about an issue and like being parliamentary procedure and whatnot.
No, you're right. I'm not going to say that, like, just because you're crying doesn't mean the conversation is healthy, because discourse is healthy. What I hate is that when I remember specifically, like, one conversation Austin and I were having about politics, and I started to get really emotional. I started to, like, get teary as I crying, and, like, he, like, backed off really quick, and I'm like, I don't want you to back off. Like, I know that I'm displaying this emotion right now, and I hate that I'm being so transparent about it, that you can see how much it affects me. Like, I don't want you to back off. Like, I wish I could just bury that shit deep and just have, like, a conversation, like, based on logic with you, but fucking emotions. Good God.
Yeah, I mean, okay, that's funny that you say that, because there was another story that I'm thinking of now where I was also debating with a friend of my husband's, and he got to the point where I can't even remember. Again, drinking was involved. When we got to a point in the conversation, he just got, like, started yelling and, like, talking really loudly, and we were at a bar, and, you know, I'm been drinking a lot, and then I just started crying while this guy was yelling and talking loudly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I, like, went to Dan. I just turned around and, like, went to Dan. I was like, and it was really embarrassing.
Yeah, it is. It's super embarrassing.
Like, and that's actually that leads us into the first kind of study that I brought up for the amusing section, is why when men are getting heated at us, why a woman might cry. And one of the theories, and again, this is one of the stupider theories in my opinion, is that crying makes your vision impaired and is thereby a sign of submission. So when a man is getting all, you know, and beating his chest around us, you know, primate.
We make a lot of ape noises on this podcast.
We are all people. We're big ape people, and we forget that because we have cell phones and
so
we wipe our
smart.
asses with paper, you know,
or bidets,
ideally. But like we like to pretend we're not part of nature. But the thinking here, and I can see it in this situation, right? Because you're getting in a fight, not a fight. You're not fighting with your husband. You're having a debate with your husband, but he's.
I mean, it's kind of...
Oh, okay, sure. It's a little bit of a fight. So things are getting heated, and he's probably getting heated, and he's probably starting to go, you know, raise a voice, start talking with more passion, and that's exactly what was happening at this bar. And by this theory, you and I were both resorting to the crying to essentially keep from irritating these dominant or like, the males in the situation, to keep from irritating them to the point where they kill us because they're more physically capable than women.
I think that this is bullshit because this is not at all a conscious thing on my part. I'm trying to tamp this shit down. You know what I mean?
I don't think it's saying it's conscious. It's saying that when you are, okay, think about my dog, right? When I yell at my dog and I go, hey, he instantly turns submissive because we have bred these dogs that live with us to be submissive to humans because that's what made them favored to us. So
then why doesn't Charlotte do this? Whenever I yell, hey, she's like, hey.
Well, that's because she's... That's because...
And I'm like, motherfucker.
She's cheeky. I don't know. She's just a little cheeky baby. Yeah, it's just... This theory would suggest that crying is a way for women to protect themselves in kind of a social hierarchy. Kind of like... I watched a documentary, I think it was about baboons or some kind of lower ape, and it was our lower primate. It's not scientist, guys. I do my best. It was about some kind of a minky, and there was like a whole narrative arc about this little baby that was born like 2 hours ago, and it was like, that baby better not make fucking eye contact with the alpha, because if he does, the alpha's gonna come and stomp that baby into the ground.
Okay. I mean, I guess I understand it, but all of that makes me think of like somehow it's conscious, in which in my case it absolutely isn't. But not all evolutionary responses.
No. It's saying that because your mom and your mom's mom and her mom and all the moms before them cried easier that their mates, their whatever, didn't smash
all right,
them.
okay, that makes more sense to me. All right, I'm picking up what you're putting down now. The women who were more likely to cry survived more.
To reproduce.
Yeah, exactly.
To lead to a bunch of weepy women that we have today.
A bunch of weepy-ass bitches.
Which, I mean, that sounds ridiculous. As a modern woman and a feminist, like, you don't want that to be the case. Like, you don't want it to be the case.
Like, I feel like my core fighting against that.
The alternative is that crying is a learned behavior, right? A behavior that women have learned to get out of a situation because they do know it puts the brake on everything.
Okay, I prefer the other theory.
Yes, that we can't help it. But this is another piece where it's very cultural, right? So that first theory makes a lot of sense in our kind of like diminutive Western culture, white women who are supposed to be very, submissive and all that kind of stuff. But that's not the case across the board. And that's the TikTok that I was watching that said that white women are the more likely to cry, or kind of like more seen as that kind of crying to get their way, which was interesting. So I did find a study that said, granted, this is just one kind of little quick study I found, that in observing preschoolers, girls and boys, like we said, they cried the same amount, but girls were more likely to be consoled by the teacher and by their peers than the little boys in the class. So we could be getting taught from a very early age that that is how we resolve conflict, that is how we, get people on our side.
I think that definitely, absolutely, women, girls, even at that age, are definitely treated more with kid gloves than little boys, which really, when you think about it, is fucking ridiculous. Because they're all teeny tiny and they all have these emotions, and it's really sad that our cultural expectations of adult women are then put on tiny children. But it's interesting that you mentioned the thing about race, because I have read studies about Black women and about how they are treated with less sympathy when it comes to like medical scenarios and things like that. So this is that cultural bit. It's like, okay, Black female children cried and didn't get the same response that white children did, white little girls did. So they kind of abandon it. And I don't think of this as a conscious behavior. I think of this as an unconscious behavior. It's like that cry it out infant who said nobody's coming.
Yeah.
And they shut that off, the same as a little boy that said, I was crying and nobody cared, so I'm going to shut that off, not in a conscious way, but in a way of just like, well, it didn't
accomplish
get me
my
anywhere.
goals.
And it's expended energy, because I don't think any white woman could say there is a lot of energy that involves in crying. So fuck that shit.
Well, exactly. And I think that the fact that we treat women differently based on our skin color is what disproves that whole fucking evolutionary bit at the top.
Absolutely.
And we'll come back to this in a second too, or maybe this is a good transition into it. Is that we all express, or we all perform in the way that society expects us to, right? So when you look at a difference between a Black woman and a white woman, you hear the trope or the stereotype of an angry Black woman. But then on the flip side, there's the stereotype of like a weepy, submissive white woman.
Yeah, each of them did the thing that they needed to get the reaction that they needed.
Exactly. Because if you're Black and you're crying, people aren't going to pay attention to you. But if you're Black and you're, advocating for yourself, that's what gets the attention. On the flip side, if you're white, you pull out those big crocodile tears and the whole world stops.
Crocodile, though, infers that it's fake.
Yes. I mean, it's a learned behavior, so they're still real. You've learned that that performance of that emotion will get you what you want.
I was going to say that word again, performance, because I was talking about this with my husband beforehand, because, I was reading the research and I was thinking about it. And I was like, I cannot think of any time in my adult life, because as a kid, kids be kids. So did I probably fake cry as a kid? Yeah, probably. I cannot think of one instance in my adult life that I have ever cried on purpose or let it go on purpose. I hate crying. It just absolutely gives that impression. And then this was from one of the articles that you linked, and one of the doctors there, he said, quote, crying signals to yourself and to other people that there's some important problem that at least temporarily is beyond your ability to cope. And that last part there, beyond your ability to cope. I never purposely signal to anybody that anything is beyond my ability to cope. So when I do cry, it is completely involuntary because I don't want anyone to know that I can't cope with it. That's always something I'm trying to bury down. I want everyone to think at all times that I'm capable, but this thing comes up. And that, again, that performative bit is the bit that keeps sticking in my craw, because crying as a woman, and I think of especially in the workplace.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Yeah. There is no right answer here. Nothing is going to turn out well for you. So if you cry in a work situation, which I have done, which is fucking humiliating.
It's the worst. Yeah.
Oh, God. And my boss at one time was giving me some feedback, and I started crying, and I was just like, fucking stop it, fucking stop it, stop it.
And that makes it worse. Once you start saying, stop crying, stop crying.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Makes it 100% worse. And so in these kind of situations where you're supposed to be seen as capable, there is no right answer here. So if you do cry, you're seen as weak. You are out of control of your emotions, and you are weak and to be pitied. Or the other way that people can see these tears is that you're using them as an emotional manipulation. The way that a lot of men in the world do. And so crying in general is this no-win situation. And that's why my perspective is I would never do this on purpose, because it's always either seen as a weakness or as an emotional manipulation.
Yes, which that's totally fair. You are not in the minority for that reaction, because that was another study that I found, was that the perception of somebody who does cry, especially if they're perceived as somebody who's fake crying, that is going to take a huge social hit, and your reputation is going to be damaged, because we don't want to feel like we're being manipulated, especially with something that's so raw and so ingrained as crying, right? Like, that's something that we consider to be, like you said, somebody who's looking for help when they can't solve it themselves. So if you're
it's kind
faking
of sacred, I guess.
Well, yeah, it would be like showing up in a wheelchair and being like, oh,
I'm disabled. What kind of disabled?
Leg disabled. Again, another show with the love of my life, Noel Fielding.
No, Chris O'Dowd, IT crowd.
Yeah. Okay, so Chris O'Dowd would be the one that you would date, but then you would like hang out with his friends and like secretly kind of attracted to Noel, and like while that's happening.
The business goth. Oh my God. The IT crowd and the business goth section. Oh my God. It made me laugh.
So good. But I mean, because it kind of contradicts that piece, because you said pity comes into a play. And I can also see why that you would not want to be pitied. Nobody wants to be pitied.
I never want to be pitied. I want to be seen as capable and strong at all times. Ugh.
Yeah, I get that. But then here's the flippity flop, because in my reflection of this, I have cried in fights, like with my husband.
Sure.
That's what we do.
Who hasn't?
But nobody goes into a fight sobbing. Crying becomes an outlet when you've exhausted all your other options. And this was the case of the situation that the fight that I was having with my husband that kicked off this whole conversation. As we were talking about something, I'd expressed my feelings, and he does his classic male avoidance thing where he's looking at his phone, looking around, da-da-da-da. And so that after, back and forth, or me beating my head against the wall, getting nowhere,
you're frustrated.
That's when the waterworks started. So is it the fact that I'm frustrated? Well, yeah, I was definitely fucking frustrated. I mean, nothing's worse than talking to somebody and them staring at their phone. Daniel, if you listen to this ever. But I will say, is it because I got to the point where I was so frustrated that I cried? Or was it because I've exhausted all other ways of getting to him, so I fell back on the one way I knew would?
I know you, and I don't think that you consciously did that. I think it's because you reached that level of frustration and emotions became so high that you, like I said, you temporarily cannot cope with them. And that is the biological response to that. Because another thing that triggers my tears, and good God, I wish that it didn't, was anger. That as a man, I feel like you have different outlets for anger. Men smash things, women start crying. And when I get really, really mad, I will start crying and I hate it. But I think it has something to do with society and how men are taught to express their emotions versus how women are taught that it's okay to express your emotions. And even though I hate it, it's the way that I have been given an outlet to do. So I do. And I get seeing red angry. I remember this time in high school, I got so angry that literally the whole world started to come down to like one pinpoint. Have you ever been that mad in your whole life?
No.
That you got tunnel vision? This is the only time it's ever happened to me. And I got tunnel vision of anger and I started to cry. And then I get even angrier that I was crying from my anger and I was just a complete fucking mess. And I hate it. So all that to say, I don't think you did it on purpose.
Well, okay, I'm going to flip the script there, right? Because I feel like, and again, this is something that is woven through this whole conversation, is this underlying misogyny around women. Well, duh, that's the definition of the word. This underlying misogyny. So you saying that I wouldn't do that because you think highly of me, to me, like, did I need to cry in that situation? Was I that frustrated? I don't know. But I do know that there was a lot of ways that my husband could have responded differently leading up to it. So if you feel that your woman, God, what am I? I don't know. If your girlfriend or your fiance or your wife or anybody you're with, if you feel that they are crying to manipulate you, like, look at the steps leading up to it. So that's kind of my turning the narrative on its head. Are you avoiding? Are you ignoring them? Are you feeding into it and ignoring a chance to talk reasonably? Because if you can nip the situation in the bud or take that kind of extreme out of it, then you're not going to be manipulated by it.
Yeah, but that's like, I think that then takes the onus off of the person who is doing the manipulating. Like, what did you do that made you cheat on me? You know what I mean? Like, it's you're flipping it a little bit too far. I don't think there is any reason to emotionally manipulate somebody with tears. I think that's a low fucking blow.
No, I think that by saying that is always the person who's crying is being manipulative, or that they're kind of crying is a manipulative act in itself, because I don't think that that's what it happens. I don't think that's how it goes. I think that there is an escalation to the point where somebody cries. So if you are crying, like we talked about in snooping, if somebody is snooping on you, what are you doing to make them feel insecure enough to snoop? So if you feel like your partner is using crying to end arguments or to resolve arguments, what is going on with your conflict management style that makes that the end game? That makes that the point that brings the resolution.
Well, yeah, if you think that they're crying to manipulate, but they actually aren't, then yeah, you're probably a fucking asshole. But that, I feel like the original scenario was brought up as, if your girlfriend or wife or whatever is trying to manipulate you, what did you do to deserve it? I don't think that that's the case, but
I think that a very small population of the world is thinking like, I'm going to cry right now.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. A very small population is doing that.
But I think that a large group of people think that when they see somebody crying, that it is manipulative, when that's not the case.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, okay, you're probably not dealing with a sociopath. Those are rare.
Yeah.
What you're dealing with is somebody who's trying to do things as best as they can, and it's led to the crying situation. Okay. Because it's escalated.
I can get on board with that. Yeah.
So the misogyny part is the assumption that any woman who's crying is being manipulative.
No. Fuck that. No, I don't think. I think that, like you said, a very small percentage of people actually do that.
Yes. Okay. So we found some kind of middle ground here.
Yeah.
And that's what's important.
The middle shall set you free, everyone.
Okay. So coming down to the rude question, is crying itself manipulative? I think we've landed on kinda, right? Like, our babies cry to get us to do things for them.
In an evolutionary kind of way, it's manipulative because that's like how our whole bodies or our emotional system has been designed.
Well, yeah, because again, it's not by choice for most of us, and it's not something that, like Laura said, that she enjoys doing. So seeing a woman crying or seeing anybody crying, it's probably they're not liking it. So they're not trying to be manipulative. And that's kind of what it comes into, is that it is a part of being alive, or I don't want to say a tool, because but I mean, it's an evolutionary tool, right? To see somebody crying, it solicits help, and that has helped that person survive, right?
Help the human race survive.
Yeah, so it's an evolutionary tool. So anything that works to our advantage can be exploited in theory, right? By that sliver, or maybe that group of people who are purposely deciding to do that. But I just say, go into a situation, assume that that's not the case. Is crying itself manipulative?
No, I don't think so. I think it is a genuine outpouring of emotion that if people are like me, they're like, motherfucker, that they don't actually want to be doing. And it's like their body is taking control.
Yes. And as much as it is easy to hate on us white ladies, know that it's not a conscious choice, right? It is because that is how we were taught how to express emotions, or how to get people to take us seriously even. Even if you're crying in a situation where a man or a woman of color wouldn't be, it's not because we're manipulating. It's because that's a socialization we've grown up with.
I think what I came away from all of this research thinking is how complex human beings are in their social structures. And I think we've talked about this a lot, about human beings are unique in the way that we have to cooperate and work together. And that is what has led to our survival as a species, is the way that we are socialized, the way that we work together. And so crying is just a part of that very complex social structure that we don't necessarily choose to do. It's just part of who we are. And that in women especially, it's something that's reinforced as this is part of how you interact in a society, and it's okay. You don't have to bury it, because we're all crying, until we hit puberty. We're all crying the same amount until we hit puberty. And then at that puberty mark, they're saying women, it's okay. And men, they're saying it's not okay. And these aren't things that we have rationalized and like put in our Rolodex of, things we come back to when we're upset. It's just something that was a biological reaction stays a biological reaction into adulthood, as opposed to men who socialize that out.
Yes, yeah. So here's a fun question, when especially looking at crying, and this wasn't in the research at all. I don't even know if I'm going to keep this. But, you've had a very strong reaction to the idea of somebody crying to manipulate someone. Mm-hmm. And that's the norm, right? That's within the norm. So where does it rank on the form, like on the level of other things that women do to get things from men, right? So like a woman wearing a low-cut blouse to the bar to get free drinks, is that at the same level of crying to manipulate, or is that
not at all?
But to me, that feels like the same thing.
I feel like it's different, because I wear a low-cut blouse and you choose how to react to it. I guess you could say the same thing about crying. Like, you choose how to react to it. It just feels different.
But there's more emotional weight there. Yeah.
Here's what it is if you fake cry, you're relying on someone's good nature to get what you want. As opposed to when you're wearing a low-cut blouse, you're appealing to their baser instincts to get what you want, which are lowly, and exploit them all you want. But those higher instincts of doing good and being good, you're exploiting those to your own gain, and it feels nastier.
But what is the morality behind it? Because helping somebody who's crying is assisting the species in carrying our genes forward, and wanting to have sex is definitely doing the same thing. What makes one more moral than the other? Oh, this is a whole different...
That's a deep question. Yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms. I don't know. Sex is gross, guys. As much as we talk about sex, it's just such a base low. It's such an ape thing.
But so is eating. Like, and guess what we're both going to do when we get off this call?
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm going right to bed. I'm not eating a pint of ice cream.
Yeah. No. Never. Never has that happened.
I don't know. It's a whole nother can of worms. They can go down in moralization or...
Well, humans are complicated. Sex versus our desire to help each other, that's inherent. That is part of humanity. But anyways.
Humanity.
So that's why when we see somebody crying and we want to help out, and that is, I guess, what it comes down to. Crying, mixed bag, can be, cannot be, but mostly it's just part of who we are and who a lot of us have been taught to be.
And a lot of women who are like, I wish I wasn't crying right now.
Okay, well, I think that puts a nice little button and bow on it, right? Thank you for riding this out with us. This is probably our least funny episode we've done today.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have a lot of funny comments to make about crying.
No, that wasn't a quip at you. I think it was just the theme, like the energy we brought to it tonight, from the research, from the topic.
A lot of emotions running high with crying.
This was definitely more of a musing topic than a comedy topic, but hopefully you learned a lot. So if you liked what you heard, be sure to leave us a rating and review.
We got that summer promo, guys.
Yes, make our wallets bleed. Take our money and give it to somebody else. That won't happen unless you rate or review on Apple Podcasts.
Make a login if you don't have an Apple phone, which I had to do. To rate my own podcast. I had to make an Apple ID even though I don't have an Apple podcast. I'm dedicated, y'all. You should be as dedicated to Impolite Society as I am.
Well, dedicated to giving $2 to or $1 to charity.
All you have to do is sign up for an Apple ID, give us a 5 out of 5, and we will donate that dollar.
I mean, really, you're a bad person if you're not doing
100%. And then if you write us a written review, you also get into a drawing for a $50 gift card. Make us pay. Make us pay.
We're not going to cry to try to manipulate you. See, look at that. We didn't cry to try to manipulate you into leaving us a review, but we should maybe.
We definitely fake cried at least like 4 times in this episode. Can you really cry? Can you really fake cry? Like, give it your best effort right now.
Yeah. Should we?
I'm going to be silent.
But no, there was an episode of Taskmaster where the task was to collect as many tears as possible. I think I would win that one. I just have to think about dead dogs.
Just think of that Sarah McLachlan. In the arms of the angel, may you find. Okay, another song that always makes me cry is the Beast with 4 Dirty Paws. From, oh God, she's doing a really good job, guys. Okay, I'm pretty impressed. You can't really hear her. Oh God, are you really crying? Oh Jesus, what did you watch? What did you watch? Pull something up on your computer.
It was about dying dogs. There's this article. It's called "A Dog I Died Today."
Oh God, now I'm crying too.
You asked for this, and I did it.
Oh, Jesus. No. I regret this. Now I'm crying. Rachel's crying. I asked for fake crying, and I solicited real crying in both of us.
These tears are not as thick as the normal tears that I cry because I brought it upon myself. So there you go. This is the weirdest episode we've ever done.
Laughing, angrily accusing each other of misogyny. Oh, God.
Your misogyny is showing. It's time. It's time. Just like this dog eating his hamburgers on his last day. It's time.
Oh God.
And now, we were making our basil tears, and now we're making emotional tears. And I have tears of gratitude for you for listening. Okay, let's kill this thing.
Okay. Let's wrap this shit up.
Oh, those drums. Play us out.